Hello friends, and welcome to Figure Study, where we appreciate the form in Transformers. Today, I'm going to be taking a look at Studio Series Megatron. This is a figure I wasn't entirely sure I was going to get, and then I just found him on the shelf at Target one day and was like, alright then. I would like to mention, first off, I am aware of the Black Mamba version, and I forget the name of the company right now, but I know there are a couple of different sort of knockoff third-party, fourth-party, whatever you want to call them, versions of this guy coming out. And they were announced before I bought him. It's just, if I'm being honest, I have some pretty severe spatial limitations at the moment. That oversized Nitro Zeus is cool, but I can't see myself accommodating minifigures of that size, and the Black Mamba version of this seems to be around that size, so I'm just gonna stick with the Voyager, because I won't have to completely rework a shelf around it. But anyway, Voyager class Studio Series Megatron. This version, I don't know if it's because I got a later run, waited on it, or if I just got lucky, but this one doesn't have the same QC issues that the earlier runs did. Like, these little bits here, which they'll be more apparent in robot mode, but like these had a tendency to pop off on a lot of people. For me, I've had them pop off on me a couple of times, but just because I was kind of twisting things and other stuff was bumping into it. They're actually on there pretty solidly, so I think Hasbro actually fixed that with the follow-up runs of this. But anyway, this alt mode it's fine. I mean, it's not a terrible-looking Cybertronian-ish tank. I think it's neat for what it is, but I do have some issues with it. First of all, it's just a lot of gray plastic, with some color up in here, but it kind of blends into itself a lot. I do like the copper detailing that they did on the parts of the treads, and also along here. That does look cool. I just kind of wish that more of these little details throughout were painted, which I may do myself at some point in the future if I'm feeling particularly brave, because I could see myself screwing it up a lot. But out of the box, it's okay. And of course, there's this nonsense going on in the front, which, as I understand it, that is movie accurate. To this day, I've never actually seen Revenge of the Fallen, so I don't actually know what Megatron's alt mode looked like in the movie, because I never really saw it. I've only seen pictures here and there. So if people say this is movie accurate, I'm just going to take it at face value, and assume that that's what that is. But it's still dumb. It's super dumb. But it's only really noticeable when you look at it from straight on. When you start to turn the tank, then you don't really see it, so it's alright. And the treads are a little bit weird too, because you've got treads going along here, but then it kind of comes up and down, so this seems a little bit of a strange design right in here, and then you've also got treads that come back here and don't really do anything. I'm assuming it's to facilitate the transformation and engineering, but I don't know, and it's just a little bit but for what it is, I think it's fine. It's a big old sea of gray with some darker plastic and that copper color, which does stand out nicely, but this guy could definitely have benefited from having some smaller details painted. As far as the silhouette goes for the vehicle mode, it's just kind of a mush. It's like a robot potato on treads with guns sticking off of it. It's only when you really get in close that you see that finer detail. Which, as I said, looks good. It's just, I don't know, it's not a particularly interesting alt mode. It's passable, just not super interesting. Anyway, to get the size comparisons out of the way, you can see that he's big. He's bigger than a deluxe, which is kind of the point, though in some cases, that's not always to be expected with Studio Series Voyagers, right? Case in point, Studio Series Prime is so much smaller than Megatron. These guys, Prime is pretty much as tall, maybe slightly taller at the end of the cab there. He's ever so slightly longer if you don't count this bit back here. Like, put it up there. And then, looking at him like this, he's just so much skinnier. And Megatron is so much beefier. That's Yeah, I'm still fairly disappointed in this guy. I'm kind of thinking I may not actually wait to see if that whole Jetfire thing is confirmed. I don't know. Now that the alt mode is out of the way, I think it's time to move on to robot mode. I just don't really have a whole lot to say about this. It's okay. There are some nice little details in there, but you can't really see a lot of it because of the fact that it's so much gray plastic. And it's not the strongest of alt mode designs for Megatron. I still feel like the Dark of the Moon version for movie Megatron is probably the best alt mode because it actually looks like something. The Last Night version, it looks okay. I think for like a Cybertronian thing, that looks better. This is just kind of like, it's obviously a tank, but it's just sort of a lump. It's a lump with treads and guns. Anyway, where was I going with this? Robot mode. Yes, robot mode. Time for robot mode. Okay, well, in the intervening moments between finishing up the transformation and getting everything readjusted, Astrid has joined us. Say hi, Astrid. Hi. So, Studio Series Megatron. This is why I wanted this figure, and this is why I'm fine with the alt mode being kind of because this robot mode, to me, is kind of spectacular. I mean, there are issues that I'll get into in a minute, but I actually really, really like this look. I mean, with Dark of the Moon Megatron, I thought the kind of busted up look with the shawl or whatever you want to call it was pretty cool, but I actually really like this as a intimidating leader of the bad guys look. I know some people are bothered by the fact that he has one spindly arm and one giant crab claw arm, but I actually really like that asymmetry. And it's not as pronounced here as it was with the leader figure, or even the previous Dark of the Moon Voyager from what I've seen, or Revenge of the Fallen Voyager, you know what I mean. Or even the previous Revenge of the Fallen Voyager from what I've seen, it's they both had larger claw arms and much weedier non-claw arms. This guy, I feel like, strikes a nicer balance. I mean, yes, still totally asymmetrical, but I think this actually works out pretty darn well. And as an added bonus, they actually painted some nice detail in the center there. It really makes me want to get some copper paint and just start doing something similar to this all over. But I do like how that breaks up all that gray. And it's also kind of cool how the way he's designed, all of the tank treads are his legs. So there's no tank treads in his upper body anywhere. And it's kind of interesting. Like, visually, I think it's interesting because the treads are entirely confined to his legs. And then I think conceptually it's interesting because the treads are his means of conveyance in alt mode and his legs are his means of conveyance in robot mode. So it's kind of funny that way. But yeah, I really, really like the look of this guy. And again, like I've said, it breaks up nicer. I do kind of wish that there was a little bit more detail breakup in the arms, but it's okay. And the way he's molded, he catches light in some interesting ways that kind of break up that gray, even though it's a lot of gray. I feel like the giant panel of the back of the tank in the alt mode, it just didn't catch light quite as interestingly as like these shoulders and arms do. So I'm more okay with the gray here. As for a closer look at that head, it's okay. I'm not that fond of movie Megatron's head. I think as far as like the different designs go, I'm probably the most fond of the Last Night Megatron's head, because that looks more like, I guess, understated almost. This just kind of looks a little bit too blatant, monstrous bad guy, and it kinda looks generic Bayformer to me. It's just a bunch of shapes. It's just a bunch of shapes with like these weird little horns coming out of the sides, and it just doesn't really do anything for me. I mean, the sculpting is nice. I like that they painted his teeth and eyes. That's really cool. And I think detail-wise, it's fine and could look nice with like a little bit of more detail in there, but painted detail, I mean. But just the design of this head does not scream Megatron to me. Even though I know he is, movie Megatron, and that's how he looked in the movie, it just doesn't quite do it for me in that regard. Overall shape, yes. That head, no. Though another thing that I just realized that I think is kind of interesting too is looking at his shoulders. This is actually surprisingly similar to Last Night Megatron's shoulder situation, where he had one shoulder that was like spiky and another one that was a bit more regular looking. It's just some interesting similarities. I don't necessarily know that there's anything going on there, especially because Dark of the Moon Megatron didn't have the asymmetrical shoulders going on, but it's interesting. It kind of makes me wonder if the Last Night Megatron design was actually sort of a partial callback to some of the earlier movie Megatron designs. Anyway, looking through the rest of the detail here, we can see more of that chest detail, and I really, really like how this came out. I definitely love the copper that's kind of intermingled in the gray here, and there's some even finer details that are in there that you can just sort of make out. Really wish they had done this with the rest of the figure, but it's okay. The giant crab claw arm has some nice detail in there as well that could use some paint, but they did paint the cannon in there, which is nice. And then he's got the big switchblade claw thing, which you can totally leave up. I prefer to have it down because I feel like that's more intimidating. And I didn't realize it until I went to get ready for this review, but he actually has this little finger there. Never even realized that was movable. The other arm also has some nice detail. A little bit of paint on the inside there. I'm not entirely sure why. This one I feel like doesn't necessarily need as much in the way of like this, because it's just so small. And then he's got these funky claw fingers, which actually kind of like this. It would be nice if they were a little more poseable, but, he's a Voyager regular retail figure, so I don't really expect that. And then legs are the pair of limbs on him that are not asymmetrical, and so they're legs. I like that he's got the backwards knee that they did with a lot of the movie Transformers. I know some people hate it, but I've always rather been kind of fond of them. And then you've got some more of that detail on what is now the outside. This used to be the inside of the tank. And here you can see there is some really nice molded detail in there. I just wish they had painted more of it. But again, I could do that myself. I suppose that's why the vehicle mode doesn't have a ton of paint on it, because they painted the outside and insides of the legs. Now these things, as you can see, they didn't actually pop off on me at all. They move up and down. I don't have to, I can kind of do this a little bit and they don't pop off. Same with this one. They will pop off, but you actually have to kind of do it on purpose. Oh, and I'm talking about all these details, and I can't do this without talking about his back, because I actually really, really like his back. And it's silly because it's his back. But I really like this. This is just a neat kind of shape and detailing. The little bits of the detail from the top of the tank are visible here, and it kind of curls up and around and tucks in here, so that gives his shoulders, around his neck area, some nice detail, which could do with some paint, but whatever. And I really like these thrusters that get exposed when you transform him. I don't know, it's a very cool way that kind of came together, gave him a little bit of a hunch, and I dig it very much. Now, the pseudo-elephant in the room is, of course, this nonsense going on here, the gap in the side of the torso. Here's the thing about that. If this really bothers you, then I've got a solution. There. If you look at him from any angle that's not like this, with the arms up most of the time, then it's not even noticeable. I mean, I get it. I get that people want the figures to be, the best that they can be. And this is definitely a flaw, this huge gap. but it seems like such a pointless thing to nitpick in the grand scheme of things. Like, this guy, all things considered, is actually really awesome. He's really cool looking, he's intimidating, he's much more accurate than other Megatrons, from what I understand, from Revenge of the Fallen. It just seems like such a pointless thing for people to be bothered by. And I'm sure in some instances, it's more people are just kind of rolling their eyes like, oh, well, that's kind of annoying, but whatever. But you know there are some people that look at that and are just like, no, I'm not buying this figure because it's got a gap in the torso that you can't see unless you're looking for it. I'm okay. It's fine. I could go on a rant for like a half hour about the weird things that I see people nitpick for Transformers toys, but this is not the place for that. The only gripe I really have with this is the fact that he could use more paint, but that's kind of a gripe that I have with a lot of Hasbro releases. And really, looking at him like this, I'm not entirely convinced he needs much more paint anyway. The bits that are kind of blank you don't see, and the bits that you do see are actually pretty nicely painted. So yeah, I feel like Hasbro and Takara, whichever of them is the one that is responsible for this design, I feel like they did a great job with this guy. While I'm not super fond of his alt mode, I think I actually like him even more than the Last Night version of Megatron, which I don't have anymore, of course, because I'm silly like that, but this is good. This is really good. It's got a really cool silhouette. I, for one, am a big fan of the asymmetry. Lots of nice color breakup. I'm just reiterating points left and right, so let's move on to those size comparisons. And this is another thing that I think is really interesting and cool about Studio Series Megatron. That's the fact that he's actually pretty big in the grand scheme of things compared to what we've been getting recently. I mean, I'm not a scale junkie. I don't mean to knock the other figures for being too small or whatever, but he's a beefy and fairly solid figure. And of course, got to put him next to Prime, and wow. Wow. I've said so many times, I don't care about scale, although I feel like this is actually pretty accurate. I don't really care how big or small a figure is in the grand scheme of things compared to what they're classified as, but the fact that these two are considered to be the same size class is kind of weird to me. Regardless, I think they look really good next to each other, but even here, as I've said before, even with Megatron, this just makes Optimus look like his color scheme is way too dull. Like, you can make out a lot of really nice detail on Megatron, whereas Optimus kind of looks like a desaturated, muddy mess, which is a real shame. I still enjoy the transformation on this guy, but they just needed to bump up the saturation and contrast a little bit on this guy's color scheme. But yes, as I said, they do look very good next to each other, so there is that. And now, just to reiterate before I wrap this up, I wanted to say, again, Studio Series Megatron is actually a quite solid figure. And I mean that in a physical sense. He feels solid. He's got some nice heft to him. I mean, he's not full of die-cast or anything like that, but considering the line he's coming from, he feels good. He feels like he's well made. He feels sturdy. He is a very cool figure, which just so happens to have a kind of disappointing alt mode, but that's more on the movie design than the figure itself. So I'm willing to give it a pass, as though I have the authority to fail it, but you all know what I mean. Anyway, I do believe that is going to do it. Not entirely sure what else I can say about Studio Series Megatron. I just really, really like this guy. The robot mode is great. The transformation took some getting used to because there are certain elements that are a little bit tricky. I don't necessarily know if I would call him my favorite in the Studio Series line, but I would absolutely put him up there with Grimlock and Starscream. And Blackout. I mean, Blackout's transformation it's a process. So I kind of consider Blackout as like a sort of side step from some of those other ones. I still really like Blackout though, but yeah, I would easily put Megatron up with Starscream and Grimlock in terms of my favorites from the line. But I think that is going to do it. That has been my look at Studio Series Megatron. What do you all think? Because I know I've ranted a lot about this guy over the course of this video, or rather, things associated with this guy. But I would like to know what you all think in terms of just everything. Do you think it's worth avoiding this guy to get the Black Mamba or the whatever other version that they're doing knockoffs for? Is this something that you'd want to get your hands on yourself? Don't care about the paint, want to paint yourself? Are any of you interested in the DNA upgrade kit? Because I imagine some of you are. And does anyone have serious issues with those gaps in the torso? I mean, like I said, I know there's got to be a few people out there who are just, no, not going to touch it because of those gaps. But I imagine most people are a bit more reasonable, and it's more of like a bummer rather than a deal breaker. And in terms of movie Megatrons, which one's your favorite design? Because as I've said, I've kind of got... It kind of goes back and forth depending on whether we're talking about the robot mode or the alt mode, but I am curious. But whatever your thoughts, feel free to comment down below. I always enjoy hearing from you all. And while you're at it, also feel free to like or subscribe. Any of those things would make me a happy Rob. And remember, art is more than meets the eye.